Imagine a world where the concept of salary has acquired a completely new, universal meaning. The boundaries between professions that once divided society into strata have disappeared. The very basis of financial inequality has vanished. Now, everyone, no matter where on the planet they wake up, be it a Tokyo skyscraper or a modest home in the Andes foothills, finds the same amount in their account. This isn't a fantasy scenario, but a systemic failure that has become a new reality. All payment systems, all banking algorithms have been instantly and silently reconfigured. The gigantic mechanism of the global economy, previously based on the principles of supply, demand, and market competition, has begun to operate according to a different, previously completely unknown principle. Income levels have been fixed at a level that statisticians of a previous era defined as average for relatively prosperous countries. Now, it is the only unchanging constant for everyone. What will you feel when you check your balance? Perhaps at first disbelief, thinking there's a mistake. But day after day, week after week, the figure remains the same. Categories like salary, bonus, and project fee disappear. The financial calendar is simplified to a single date, the day when everyone's universal basic income is deposited into their account. Money arrives not as a reward for effort, but as a fact of existence, like access to oxygen or sunlight. The world has yet to comprehend the consequences of this shift. While cities go about their business as usual, and people rush about their daily lives, the invisible foundations of their reality have already been irrevocably altered. Stability has become total, but at what cost? The answer to this question has yet to be found. What happens when economic coercion disappears? Does the desire to engage in labor, no one voluntarily choose, disappear along with it? Let's look at how the global labor market reacted after the introduction of a single income. Imagine an industrial workshop. The roar of machines, the vibration of the floor, the air thick with metal and oil particles. Previously, shifts of workers stood here, their labor paid above average. Now imagine the workshop empty. The doors are wide open, the conveyor belt stands still. This isn't a consequence of a crisis or bankruptcy. It's a direct consequence of the new order of things. Why voluntarily expose yourself to noise, dirt, and potential danger if the results of your labor are no longer converted into financial reward? The financial incentive that for centuries drove people into mines, onto fishing trawlers during stormy season, onto round-the-clock assembly lines, has simply evaporated. Dangerous, dirty, and monotonous professions were the first to be abandoned. The mass exodus wasn't a protest, but a statement of fact. Economic viability had ceased to exist. At the same time, other spaces emptied as well. Not factory floors, but the glass skyscrapers of financial capitals. Traders' offices, where multi-million-dollar deals were once concluded, now stood silent. Monitors were dark. Why? Because the very object of trade, the financial advantage, had disappeared. The adrenaline rush associated with risk and huge bonuses lost all meaning when bonuses were equalized for everyone. Employees left their jobs without waiting for official layoffs. They were fired by reality itself. A similar situation is observed in industries where work was measured solely by sales volume or the number of court cases won. High-stress work, justified only by the potential for high earnings, ceased to be of interest to anyone. A system built on competition and monetary incentives collapsed the moment money ceased to be a motivating tool. What remains when the pursuit of profit disappears? All that remains is pure action, and not every action is worth doing. What happens to the concept of a working day when it no longer measures the value of your labor? We continue our observations of a world where time has acquired a new value. Imagine an office building during rush hour. But instead of the usual stream of people rushing to their computers, you see only sparse movement. People don't arrive at 9 o'clock, but when it's convenient for them. They leave their desks not after 8 hours, but when they feel like it. The widespread transition to shorter, flexible working hours wasn't a legislative initiative, but an organic consequence of the new reality. Why spend strictly measured hours at a machine or in a meeting if the final account balance at the end of the month remains unchanged? The very foundation of work discipline based on financial necessity has disappeared. The volume of goods and services produced has begun to steadily decline. Manufacturing, services, logistics, all sectors of the economy have faced declining productivity. Assembly lines that once ran 3 shifts now run for a few hours a day. Projects that were once completed to a strict deadline now drag on indefinitely. But what's replacing discipline? Spontaneous self-organization. Teams begin to agree on who will report to work and when, in order to maintain the minimum necessary functionality. Job descriptions lose their meaning. A manager might unload goods, while an engineer might answer phones. Not only has the hierarchy of pay disappeared, but the hierarchy of responsibilities itself. Work is performed on a residual basis, after personal needs for rest, socializing, and hobbies have been satisfied. The concept of overtime has completely disappeared from common usage, as it lacks both motivation and definition. Career advancement, once the driving force behind professional activity, has lost all meaning. The desire to become a boss has been replaced by a reluctance to take on additional responsibility without any reward. The economy of equal sharing has given birth to an economy of minimal effort. What happens to society when basic economic incentives lose their power? We continue to explore a world where time and resources have acquired new values. Imagine a city's main street. Notice the storefronts. Electronics and designer clothing stores are empty, while experiential spaces are booming. Lines form not for the latest smartphone, but at travel agencies offering itineraries to the most remote corners of the planet. Ask yourself, where would you go if your financial resources were unlimited and at the same time equal to everyone else's? Gyms, swimming pools, and climbing walls can't accommodate everyone. Physical activity has ceased to be a way to stay in shape and has become a core leisure activity. Take a look at trade statistics. Book sales, especially fiction and non-fiction, have increased several-fold. Musical instruments, paints, canvases, and craft supplies disappear from shelves immediately after delivery. People are turning en masse to creative pursuits, which they previously often put off due to a lack of time or money. Cafes and restaurants are packed during the day and evening, becoming not just places to eat, but spaces for leisurely conversation. Parks, squares, and embankments are filled with people simply strolling, reading, or playing board games. A new economy is emerging, based not on the possession of things, but on gaining experience, developing skills, and maintaining social connections. The market is rapidly reorienting itself, offering an increasing number of services in entertainment, education, and hobbies. Consumption is shifting from the material to the emotional and intellectual, even if the emotional evaluation of these processes remains behind the scenes. What happens to an education system when it loses its primary utilitarian function? Training specialists for the labor market. We explore the transformation of universities and schools in a world where profession no longer determines income. Imagine the admissions office of a large university. The building's architecture speaks of its stature and tradition, but the makeup of the applicant pool has changed dramatically. Files of documents lie on the desks, but no one is applying to the faculties of finance, management, or corporate law. These fields, once the most prestigious, have emptied out overnight. Why spend years studying complex disciplines related to profit maximization if the concept of profit has lost its personal economic meaning? Ask yourself, what field of study would you choose if your future income didn't depend on it? The answer becomes obvious when you look at the neighboring buildings. Lines form for the faculties of philosophy, art history, archaeology, astronomy, and classics. People are turning en masse to fields considered impractical for centuries, yet holding the keys to understanding human experience. The lecture halls of these departments are overcrowded, but attendance has become completely irregular. Students come not to earn credit toward their degrees, but to learn something new. The grading and exam systems are losing their former rigidity. The learning process is transforming from purposeful preparation into free exploration. Faculty, deprived of the leverage of stipends and the threat of expulsion, are forced to make their lectures truly engaging to retain their audiences. Education ceases to be a social elevator and becomes an individual path for intellectual and cultural development. Pragmatism gives way to curiosity and expediency to genuine interest. Fundamental sciences and the humanities, which for decades existed on the fringes, are experiencing an unprecedented renaissance, while applied and commercial disciplines are slowly but surely becoming a thing of the past. What happens to one of the most fundamental human assets, real estate, when it ceases to be an investment? We explore how cities and settlement patterns changed when the economic engine of the housing market was halted. Imagine a panorama of a metropolis. Notice the construction cranes. Their booms are frozen in place. The roar of machinery that accompanied the city's upward growth for years has given way to silence. Ask yourself, why build new residential complexes when the financial incentive has disappeared? Construction companies, whose business model was based on the sale and resale of square meters, ceased operations. The real estate market didn't collapse. It froze, like a pendulum at its peak. The very reason for buying and selling disappeared. It's impossible to make a profit on a transaction when the incomes of all participants are equal. Why trade a spacious apartment in the city center for a similarly priced but smaller one on the outskirts? The pendulum migration between business centers and residential areas has ceased. Now look at the city map. Neighborhoods once considered elite, and neighborhoods once considered less prestigious, retained only their historical names. Their material basis, land value, was erased. People remained living where this change had caught them. The dynamic flow of population was replaced by a static picture. The urban mosaic froze. Streets that were supposed to be cleared for new highways remain in their former state. Infrastructure projects aimed at connecting promising neighborhoods lost all meaning. Urban space ceased to be a commodity and began slowly to return to its original physical essence, simply a place to live. Having lost economic gradation, territories also lost the social mobility associated with it. The urban fabric, deprived of constant financial redistribution, begins to function according to new, as yet not fully understood laws. What happens to social mobility when its main driver, economic inequality, fails? We explore how the principles of social formation have changed when the direct link between work, status, and the future of new generations has disappeared. Imagine a map of a large city. Neighborhoods that were designated as elite or disadvantaged on old maps today retain only geographic names. Expensive boutiques and private clinics in the central districts have closed as their target audience has lost its exclusive financial status. At the same time, infrastructure on the outskirts is gradually leveling out as demand for basic services has become universal. But the most interesting thing is not the change in the urban landscape, but the shift in social dynamics. The concept of social mobility loses its meaning. Why strive for a leadership position if it brings neither financial advantages nor special status? The hierarchy, built for centuries on capital and position, has collapsed, leaving behind a horizontal structure. Now imagine a school classroom. Children no longer choose their profession based on their parents' income or the prestige of their future job. The very basis for inheriting social status has disappeared. The child of an engineer can spend all day drawing, while the offspring of a prominent lawyer can assemble mechanical mechanisms. The choice of occupation is determined solely by personal interest, not potential profit. parents have lost the leverage based on arguments about the financial stability of a particular career. Professional dynasties, whether doctors, actors, or scientists, are disappearing as the economic rationale for their preservation has disappeared. The bond between generations is now built on other, non-material foundations. Society deprived of economic incentives for upward mobility is beginning to self-organize according to new, as yet not fully understood principles, where the primary value is not position in the hierarchy, but individual fulfillment. What happens to management when its core tools, reward and punishment, disappear? We explore how complex systems function in the absence of traditional hierarchy. Imagine the trading floor of a large corporation. Monitors that once displayed stock charts and key performance indicators now show static numbers. The senior executive is in their office, but their phone is silent. Orders that were once followed without question are now met with silent resistance or endless discussions. Ask yourself, how can you get someone to complete a task if you can neither raise their salary nor fire them? The levers of control honed over centuries of capitalist development have become ineffective. The effectiveness of order execution is approaching zero. Turn your attention to the government apparatus. Mid-level officials continue to come to work, but their activities are reduced to collective discussions of routine issues. Any document, even the most insignificant, requires approval from numerous employees, as no one wants to take on personal responsibility without the incentive of career advancement. A system devoid of vertical power is forced to make decisions horizontally. This process is extremely slow and often leads to management paralysis. Major infrastructure projects, road repairs, the launch of new public transportation lines, network modernization, are stalled at the planning stage. It's impossible to determine who is responsible, and it's impossible to motivate those responsible. Management structures gradually turn into discussion clubs, where discussion replaces real action. The difficulty of coordinating any step becomes inversely proportional to the speed of its implementation. What happens to the planet when human economic activity enters a minimally supportive mode? We conclude our observation of a world that has undergone a major social transformation. Imagine a panorama of a large city a few years after the change. Notice the building facades. Uniform storefronts and strict corporate styles have been replaced by a colorful diversity. Walls are covered with complex, multi-layered graffiti, the result of countless hours of creativity. The balconies of residential buildings are decorated with handmade wrought iron elements, stained glass, and intricate wood and metal constructions. The architectural environment, previously developed according to commercial laws, now reflects the personal aesthetic preferences of millions. Shift your gaze to the streets. During the day, they are filled with people, but traffic has become minimal. Pedestrians and cyclists make up the bulk of the traffic. People are not rushing about their business. They stroll, meet, and improvise. The lack of economic pressure to constantly rush has changed the rhythm of city life. Now turn your attention to the outskirts. Former industrial zones, factory sites, and logistics hubs are slowly but surely being reclaimed by nature. Trees sprout from the asphalt of parking lots, and ivy covers the facades of factory buildings. The production of essential goods, food, medicine, and even basic clothing is maintained decentrally through voluntary rotation. People take turns without any coercion, performing work deemed beneficial to the community. This is not an economy in the classical sense, but rather a complex system of collective self-service, where exchange occurs not through money, but through mutual participation. Civilization, freed from the total power of the market, has not disappeared. It has transitioned to a new static state, dominated not by financial flows, but by physical space, slowly changing under the influence of time and the spontaneous creative activity of the population.